there is a tendency towards making more short-term oriented decisions compared to more long-term oriented decisions. And that does vary a little bit depending on the study and the specific condition. But depression, anxiety, PTSD, they have drawn these conclusions. So I think what's super interesting about this is that, your psychological state actually tells you about what is neurobiologically happening and can help us to predict the quality of the choices that might be made. But, I think that isn't always the concern that people have when they're in those states. So far more is probably the question of how do you support that versus telling them, oh, in addition to this, you also have to be closely monitoring for your decision-making capabilities.
That is fascinating. Austin, you gave such a good introduction into this segment. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot already. Before we open up to Q&A, I was wondering if you'd like to ask the audience a question and play a bit of a game.
I would love to. And the question that I would, so let's just establish how this works. Basically, we're going to open up the floor for hand raising, and we're going to ask you to raise your hand if the answer to the question is yes. So that's the plan. And the question that I have, imagine it's just me, is raise your hand if you have been the recipient of a scam phone call in the last, let's start with a year. So have you been the recipient of a spam phone call in the last year? And that can be from the IRS or from your car warranty expiring. Basically somebody that you could say is trying to scam me out of my money. So let's open up the floor here to everyone, and now raise your hand if somebody has tried to scam you in the last year.
My hand is very much raised. It's so funny you asked that because I get about 100 calls per day.
That is a lot. Let me just say, as people are raising it, I'm actually kind of surprised that more people haven't raised their hands. But as I mentioned in the first lecture on this topic, the FTC has actually tracked people who have reported scams, and the number has gone up incredibly high since COVID started. People are out there just trying to take advantage of exactly what I described. You're stressed. They expect you to make worse decisions. It's really unfortunate. Okay, so we had about, let's say, 15 to 20 people who raised their hands here. I'm actually quite surprised. I'd like to ask how many people here have tried to scam others, but I don't think that's appropriate. So I will ask you, Louisa, if you have a question that you would like to pose.
Okay, I'm going to turn hand raising off. And then my question for everybody in the audience is, if you have ever bought into a scam, or even, I don't know if I shared this in part one, but I, on Mother's Day, so I'm from Australia, my parents live in Australia. On Mother's Day, I wanted to buy my mother a bunch of flowers and have it delivered. And unfortunately, I bought it from a scam site. Austin, it drove me insane. I'm still trying to deal with it, actually, because I'm mortified by it. So what they did was they copied an actual website from where my parents live, like their hometown. They copied the website, but it was a scam. So my mum never got the flowers, and this was an actual fake company, and my money went to somebody in, I don't know where it was, somewhere in Asia, and it was really upsetting. So has anybody been through anything like that where they've spent money and it ended up being a scam and not the real thing?
As people are raising their hands, I would be fascinated to hear people's stories if they're willing to share it, because I think it takes so much power away from scammers when we at least know what they're up to. So you've heard that story before, and you can be more aware of it. But it looks like decent amount of people here have had that experience, Louisa.
Not as many as I thought. Okay, let's open up for Q&A. And guys, we have to be really clear about what we're going to be doing now. So once we bring people up for a Q&A, it's going to be very simple. First and foremost, please don't come up and ask any type of medical questions. We know that. Second of all, if we can make this really, I would say really concise by just saying, hi, my name is, my question is, that would be really useful for all of us to maximize our time. And lastly, what do I have to add to that, Austin? Anything else?
I think real key here is we do appreciate your personal background, but in order to get everybody up on stage so they can talk, let's just keep the personal stuff to a minimum, unless I think the only caveat here would be if you want to tell a short story about your experience with somebody scamming you, and I want to clarify, short, these can be very long. I would love to just hear at least the pitch that you got so that we can be aware of what else is out there. But that's about it, Louisa. I'm ready.
Amazing. I am too. We have our first speaker, and it is Hanad.
Hi, how are you doing? My name is Anad. I wanted to add one thing for as a web designer and developer, as somebody who's been working there for a while. Dark patterns is a way that people basically get scammed and pushed to do things online. And the best example is when you're shopping and it says 5 people have this item in the shopping cart, or only 3 items left. Those are another way to basically manipulate you to purchasing stuff. But I do have a very quick question. I do know that system two, or like decision making, gets worse over time, as over the day, as you make more decisions. You have a finite number of complex decisions that you can make well. Is there anything that you can elaborate on that, and what does the science say about that?
First of all, thank you so much for the comment. I mean, I think I'd be interested to know when people say there really is only one left, only one in somebody's cart, if that is accurate or if it's just kind of a, a technique used to impose that scarcity, because I've definitely seen that. I mean, you go to Etsy, everything, there's only one left and it's in somebody's cart. But to your point here, as far as decision-making capability throughout the day, I mean, I think there are differing schools of thought on this. There's the one idea, which is the subject of basically ego depletion, which is a complicated way of saying you lose your ability to make good decisions the more decisions you make, which is really pioneered by a guy named Roy Baumeister, um, who wrote a book on willpower. And then there's the others who think it's not necessarily a willpower issue. It's not necessarily the ability to, like, making decisions isn't necessarily like a finite resource. But I'm of the mind that yeah, you do have you can't just continuously make good decisions throughout the day. You have to expend your energy in the places you care about more. But there are things that can be done to offset that. I mean, I think I'm not a fan of the nap in general. I think it throws off a person's sleep schedule, but I think that there is decent research showing that you can improve cognition, at least short term, after that. Similarly with not necessarily decision making, but at least focus with caffeine and the like. But there are a lot of kind of speakers on this subject who will talk about you have to make your best decisions in the morning, you have to save your evening for the less draining stuff. And I found personally that is the case. But I can't say that there's a ton of hard science as far as here's exactly how you have to structure your day in order to optimize decisions over the course of it. What do you think, Louisa? I think it's a really good question.
I think that's an awesome question. I just wanted to just touch on what you said earlier, where you said how many people are buying the items. I'm telling you that throws me off. So I'm so happy that you said that. I didn't know if it was a real thing or not, because it says 16 people from Australia have purchased this and 14 people have got this in their cart, and it's like, oh my gosh. So it really does have an effect on me. I just wanted to add that in.
Just to answer that real quick, because Dr. Austin also asked, that's really not. Those numbers aren't real. It's basically fake, just designed to get you excited, and to get you more inclined to purchase.
That's very smart.
Very helpful.
Yeah. Hannah, thank you so much for coming up and sharing that and asking your question. We're going to move on to Chris now. Hi, Chris.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I just quickly wanted to address the last issue, and so I think it's really important for us to distinguish between scams, cons, and just techniques of persuasion, because there's something, I mean, like persuasion's everywhere around us, and that's not all scams. I mean, there's I don't know. I mean, like, I think one might be able to define it their own way, but there's definitely a distinction between those three things. And I just want to tell my story quickly about being conned. It was when I was fresh out of college. This is 20 years ago. I was behind a very expensive business building right in the Back Bay in Boston, smoking a cigarette. And a guy came by on a bicycle, and he had a Best Buy shirt on. and he had a extremely expensive camcorder in there. And he came straight out at me. He goes, "Look, man, I work at Best Buy. I don't make enough money to support my family. I stole this. I want to make some money off of it. I'll I'll sell it to you for XYZ," which was significantly under the amount. So I said, I mean, like at that age, I ran through my mind. I'm like, well, yeah, sure. I mean, like at this point, it's gone. It's going to help everyone. Even though I knew what I was doing is also illegal because, at least in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, if it's a too good to be true situation, then the jury can still find you guilty of receiving stolen goods. But anyways, I got the money out of the ATM, came back, gave it to him. He gave it to me, and at that point, I wanted that transaction totally done. So I'm like, all right, thank you, have a good day. But he literally was like standing there close to me and kept talking to the point that I went back inside. And so the way he played it off was very, very like it was very convincing. Also, he used the idea that I would probably know that what I did wasn't right, so I probably wouldn't um, um, report him. But anyways, there was a perfectly sealed box with the exact weight with a piece of concrete from a sidewalk in Boston in there. And when I opened it up, I wasn't upset. I smiled. I thought to myself, good for you, buddy. But hopefully you can put those skills into like being like a great salesman or something else, because you you did a great job getting that for me. I'm Chris, and thank you for letting me share.
Chris, thank you. I think your point is a good one as far as especially the differentiation between a scam and marketing. And I did go into that in detail last time we did this. But the other thing is what you just described is basically what happened to me, with the exception of I wasn't told it was stolen. Maybe it was. But thank you for sharing your story. Let's go ahead and move on to Sharath. Welcome to the stage.
I just lost my earphone. You can hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. So I'm constantly mind boggled that there are no like international cooperation and treaties and so on to fix this issue. I'm pretty sure it's highly underreported. And being from India, I know that India itself, after it became the back office of the world, and a lot of call centers were based in India, but you also had this dark side where there were scams run out of India. I might personally get a call from what's supposed to be the IRS and so on, and those sort of scams. So I'm just wondering, first of all, from a medical perspective or close to a medical perspective, is there a way if we run some sort of a psychometric test, can we find out if someone is vulnerable to a scam and then maybe protect them, especially the elderly? And secondly, are you aware of national registries and so on, so that these numbers that people get scammed from can be auto added or reported, and then the whole nation basically knows that that number is a scam?
Yeah, thank you. That's some really great questions. I think to your second one, I don't know if there's an international group that is doing anything about this. In the United States, I just recommend people go through the FTC. That's the one that I primarily seen as an agency, the Federal Trade Commission, that kind of compiles all of this information and ideally does something about it. I mean, to the earlier point, a lot of scams are not reported because people feel so terrible about it, and they want to keep it to themselves. So they don't know there's anything that they would benefit from in order to tell people about it. So I think that's a really good point. But at least in the United States, that's where I would recommend people go. So ftc.gov. As it relates to better understanding who is at risk for scams, and also if there's testing, there's a lot of conversation here. I don't think there's anything that's all that substantiated as far as widespread efforts beyond just understanding that elderly, especially elderly with cognitive decline, elderly with mental health issues, and elderly with poor mobility are all at higher risk of being scammed. And so is some help as far as trying to educate those elderly as well as their loved ones about the fact that this higher risk exists. There is some conversation about doing brain scans and stuff to see who might be at higher risk, or just doing cognitive testing to see who would be at higher risk. And there's even some conversation about doing something like transcranial magnetic stimulation of various parts of the brain, like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, in an effort to kind of protect that person from future scams. Obviously, that's not something that's an active tool being used. I've been to many retirement homes and communities in Florida, and I don't think anybody is putting on those helmets to improve their ability to fight off scams. But I think the bottom line is this is a huge, huge deal as far as amount of money and emotional damage that it's causing people. But because of the fact that it's usually a little bit kind of under the table, a lot of people don't want to report it. And so I think until it becomes, it's a weird thing to say, but I think we need more openness of people talking about what has happened to them and their specific instances. Otherwise, we're just going to assume it was only us, and we're never going to want to talk about it. But definitely appreciate your question, and your comments were well taken. Sequoia, welcome up here. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you, Austin. I'm enjoying these series. I tuned in last week as well. My father-in-law, who's 86, was recently scammed out of some tens of thousands of dollars. And one of the things that we sort of looked at is some of his prescriptions having an effect on the dopamine system. I'm curious if you have any opinion on some different drugs that are out there, maybe some warnings that should be given to seniors that they might be looking for more dopamine fixes. Have you heard anything like that?
That it's such an interesting question, and I guess I forgot to say one thing to the previous speaker. The FTC is where you report this stuff. Definitely call the police. Like if you're being scammed, if somebody's trying to take money from you, a lot of times they use intimidation techniques, and they tell you like, we're going to call the police. The police are coming. I've listened to these videos. They literally play police sirens in the background. There's so many terrible things that get done, and I think talking to the police. It can seem like you're embarrassed. It can seem like a bad plan. And these scammers will tell you don't do that. But at least you can get the confirmation from them that they're not involved. This is a scam. And in some cases, they can help to recover and potentially even prosecute. So I know, Sequoia, that wasn't what you were talking about. But to your question, the question as to, are certain people at higher risk, and specifically are certain medications either an indicator of higher risk, or can they themselves kind of confer higher risk? So to the first point, people take medications for a variety of reasons. Some of those reasons, let's say depression, are associated with making worse decisions. So a person who is on an antidepressant, that may actually be improving their decision making in theory, but it may also just be an indicator that they are at higher risk for making poor choices. And there's an interesting study I recently reviewed where they looked at decision-making in depression and basically found that even in treatment, there were patterns of worse decision-making in people with a diagnosis. So something to think about there. It's just like, is the medication telling you something as far as that person's brain function? Not necessarily saying bad brain function, but just different. And then the other piece specifically is looking at dopaminergic agents and the dopamine system in decision-making. And there is fascinating work that has been done on specifically Parkinson's disease and looking at how these dopamine agonists or dopaminergic agents may correlate with patterns of worse decision making, how having too much dopamine may cause people to behave more impulsively. And so, I mean, I was reading I think it was from the federal judiciary system in preparation for this really long document they compiled. And one of the things they mentioned was how these drugs may affect decision-making and susceptibility to scams. There are case reports of people spending all of their money on scams, and those are people who are taking these medications. But I think, too, coming back to the original point, when you consider a condition like Parkinson's disease, which is characterized by alterations in cognition, some of this may have to do with the fact that the underlying brain anatomy has already kind of suffered a hit that predisposes to worse decision making. But my sense is that yes, certain agents, especially dopaminergic agents, may predispose people to patterns of worse decision making, including scams. I don't always know that that gets incorporated into the risk-benefit analysis as far as taking those meds. I don't always know if it's even possible, but I think that if this continues to be a topic people are interested in, that risk may be.
Yeah, just I could give an observation after my after the scam took place.
Your
I have a
Sequoia,
friend, who's a district attorney here in Silicon
your
Valley, and we
reception.
checked in with her about. Okay, if my reception's bad, I'll stop. Thank you.
Just start from the beginning, Sequoia.
I was going to say that my friend, who's a district attorney, we took my father-in-law's case to her with all the examples. And here in Santa Clara County, it doesn't even reach the district attorney's office till the scam gets above $100,000 because they have had so much elder fraud. And it's not just seniors that we think about. She was telling me a story about a active duty military officer who was scammed out of her house through this process. So it's not only seniors that can fall for these traps. Yeah, anyway,
Yeah,
very interesting conversation.
It's really interesting to also, for anybody who's in this room, obviously you have some interest in it, but you can find the scripts that scammers will use, and they're very convincing. There was one I was reading the other day. They tell you you have won $400,000. We're so thankful. We're so excited for you with the government. I'm officially with the government. All we need is for you to send us a check for 1/10 or 1/100th of that amount of money to pay for the shipping, and we'll refund it when we get there. And congratulations again. What are you going to do with your money? And then, of course, you send the money and you never get that $400,000 check. But there are very talented copywriters behind this. And I think, again, maybe partially for entertainment and also for education, checking out some of these scripts can be a worthwhile use of time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sequoia.
Well, we have no more questions down in the audience. Austin, I really enjoyed today.
I'm glad. That's the important thing. And I'm hoping that people were able to take away a couple of take-home messages as far as, like, there are so many reasons why we need to be prioritizing brain health. And I think that this is one of them. And I think that, unfortunately, just like most things, we tend to only see the effects of poor brain function at the end of the spectrum. We tend to only pay attention to it when we've lost our best opportunities to improve brain function. So thinking about something like Alzheimer's disease or risk for stroke, those are the situations in which all of a sudden we say, oh, my brain function isn't as good as I wish it was. And we don't necessarily think about our risk for making bad decisions. We don't necessarily think about our risk for scams as another outgrowth of those same processes. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people have different interests. And some people are interested in preserving their money. And if that's your interest, then you really need to focus on your brain health. Because if you don't pay attention to diet, don't pay attention to sleep, don't get enough exercise, you are far more likely to be parted with your money as the result of making poor decisions, as the result potentially of just being downright scammed. And I think, Louisa, too, the fact that both you and I have been scammed or conned is evidence that this can happen to just about anyone. So unless we start building our defenses, our psychological defenses, our biological defenses, we should expect that this is something that we'll have to deal with. So again, hopefully something that people can have a take-home message, that they can understand why this is so important, and maybe even educate some people in their friend and family circle on what to look out for.
I 100% agree with you. And probably the biggest thing that I gained from today's conversation is, I mean, it's all around the fact that we can make poor decisions based on our brain health. I really loved how you linked that, and that everything to me really comes down to how we treat our brain. And I actually just got a question on Twitter, and the question was, I mentioned that I'm talking with Dr. Austin on Clubhouse, and we're linking poor decision making to the prefrontal cortex. And he said, well, what are some things that we can do to protect that? And I said, just the basic things that we always speak about. There's never anything new. There's not a magic pill in there that can help you. It really is just starting with the basics. That is, if you are a healthy adult and without any type of neurodegenerative disease or any type of TBI, etc. Regardless of medications, you can be doing exercise. We all know that the link between certain types of exercise is great for our brain. Sleep, oh my gosh, if you listen to me, I speak immensely on the beneficial effects of sleep, especially on brain function. What we eat, especially staying away from refined sugar. I think we've done an episode on refined sugar and its effects on the brain. So these types of things that are not nuanced, these are things that we all know about, but it's all about just putting it into place and being consistent. So I'm really happy about that. And I'm really happy about how today went, Austin. So thank you so much for joining me up here. Why don't you tell us where we can all find more about your podcast?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Louisa. So I have a podcast. It's called Get the Stuck Out. And I try to just explore what is keeping us stuck in our thought patterns that are just our brain and our body that leads to poor health. And you can find it on the platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcast. And I always post updates when I have new podcasts on my Instagram account. So that's probably the best place to get updates from me. And Louisa, let's go ahead and turn it back to you. You mentioned at the start that you have a new podcast out with Dominic D'Agostino. Well, is it out yet, or did you just record it?
No, guys, it is out. If you go to any major platform, Spotify, iTunes, you type in the Neuro Experience, Neuro, Neuro, you will find my podcast, and the latest episode is with Dom D'Agostino. And then also, if you go to the link on my Instagram or my Twitter, it'll show you where you can sign up to our free newsletter, which gets distributed once per week. We really love it. It's jam-packed with information such as the ones that we spoke about today, everything around neuroscience and athleticism. And other than that, next week, to give you a sneak peek, we're probably going to be touching on, Austin and I haven't really discussed this yet, but we've got a number of different topics that we're going to be probably bringing forward, and one of them may be around ketones and the brain. So I'm really excited about that one.
Yeah, lots of good topics. I think getting back to cerebral metabolism and how our relative levels of glucose and fructose and lactose and all the other things influence the way that we perceive the world is super important.
All right, well, thanks, Austin, for joining me. Everybody else, thank you for joining and coming in, especially if you stayed the entire time. Please come back next week at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But I hope everyone has a very nice week. And if you're in New York City, enjoy the sun. And I'm going to be closing this room right now. So thanks, guys. Have an awesome night.